Bore da, good morning, and croeso I Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru. Welcome to the National Assembly for Wales. It's really a great pleasure to see so many of you here this morning, and what's interesting is seeing lots of new faces all here together, because often you go places and you see the same faces at the same event. So lovely to see so many people here, and dare I say it, Angharad, lots of even younger than me people, which is fantastic. So it's very important that you have come here this morning to help us celebrate International Women's Day. International Women's Day is celebrated throughout the world, and as I've just been told by a colleague over there, she was in China 2 years ago to celebrate International Women's Day, and when the women walked in the room, the men all stood up. So for the four of you that are here, and what is interesting is how International Women's Day is taking on a much bigger importance in Britain, and particularly in Wales. And there are lots and lots of events this year. In fact, next year we may have to produce a calendar to make sure that some of the events don't clash with each other. But there are lots of refreshments. Do help yourself. Before we actually get the session underway, I wanted to say a few words of welcome and to put this event into context. This date, as you know, has been observed since the early 1900s, a time of great expansion and turbulence in the industrialised world that saw some booming population growth and the rise of radical ideologies. We might be less radical these days, but today is the day when we should take time to reflect on the sacrifices made by women worldwide who brought about positive changes which have put us where we are today. Only last week I had the honour and the privilege of addressing a group of women from Libya and Jordan who had come to learn about what we do. You know, it's a real stark reminder to me of the continuing struggle to get women's voices heard in some parts of the world. So they may have the right to vote, but the fact they're afraid to vote, you know, is a huge step that we have to overcome. Now, the National Assembly has a legal duty under the Government of Wales Act to promote equality. And I am really very pleased that this duty has been taken extremely seriously since the Assembly came into being in 1999. Delivering equality has become part of our custom and practice. And importantly, and some of you have heard me say this before, we don't do it because we have to do it. We do it because we want to do it and because it's the right thing to do. Now, during my term as presiding officer, which I must say is a real privilege to be in this role, one of the themes I will be concentrating on is equality. And this year the focus will be on women, and today's seminar will explore the barriers to women's participation and representation. But I don't want this seminar to be a one-off, so I am announcing today that I will be holding a series of regional events across Wales over the coming months, which will accumulate in a national conference in November. And I hope that that conference will build on the outcomes of each of those events and task me and my fellow Assembly members, some of whom are here this morning, with actions to ensure that the barriers to participation are removed. Now, I'm absolutely delighted that Angharad Meyer, who is the Managing Director of Tinopolis, has agreed to chair this morning's session. She will introduce our panel, who of course actually need no introduction, but I'm sure you will be aware they're all women who continue to push at the artificial barriers and some real barriers which are put in the way of women in Wales. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. I hope you participate, that the outcome of this morning will be very positive. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Angharad Meyer.
Bore da I chi gyd, good morning and happy International Women's Day. It's great to be here. The first thing I have to do is explain how these work if you need translation facilities. Now, you've got this little contraption here. You need to ensure that you're on channel 1 and then that the sticker bit is towards you, and then you just put them like this. As na I newid nawr I siarad Cymraeg, if anybody needs them. Ydy pawb nawr yn gallu deall fi os ych chi angen defnyddio'r rhain? Os unrhyw un yn cael problemau? Anybody having problems? Pawb yn iawn? Na ni, gwych. Wel, mae'n ffraint fawr I fi gael bod yma'r bore yma, mae rai fi weid. Ac wrth gwrs mae Diwrnod Rhyngwladol y Menywod, fel glywon ni nawr, yn ddiwrnod pwysig iawn yn y calendar rhyngwladol. Ac thema Cenhedloedd Unedig eleni yw Empower Rural Women, End Hunger and Poverty. Ac wrth gwrs, os yw menywod mewn gwledydd yn y trydydd byd yn gallu cael cymorth I sicrhau bod nhw yn gallu cael newid y sefyllfa nhw, mae hynna wrth gwrs yn ei dro wedyn yn mynd I newid sefyllfa cymunedau cyfan. Yr hyn sy'n ddiddorol I ni yng Nghymru, dwi'n meddwl, I think what's really interesting for us in Wales is that everything in Wales sort of tends to suggest that women are completely equal to men. And the idea of an International Women's Day seems a little bit unnecessary here. But as I'm sure we'll hear from our guest speakers today, that is very far from the truth. And we need to ensure that women are better represented at all levels of society, but especially, I would think, at the top, where we lag far behind most other European countries, and that's not good for us at all. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce your guest speakers for today, our panellists Anne Beynon, Wales Commissioner for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Kate Bennett, National Director for Wales at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Laura McAllister, Chair of Sport Wales, and Claire Clancy, Chief Executive and Clerk of the National Assembly for Wales. Fydd pob un ohonyn nhw yn rhoi siarad gyda chi fan hyn heddi ac wedyn fe fydd cyfle I chi ofyn cwestiynau. There'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions after we've heard from them individually. But first we'll hear from Kate Bennett, who will introduce this document, Who Runs Wales, who explains the journey towards gender equality. Diolch yn fawr, Kate.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne Harrod. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and happy International Women's Day to everybody here. I'd like to start out really by officially noting that Rosemary Butler is the first women presiding officer that we've had in Wales, and I think that's a fantastic achievement. It's a massive bonus that Rosemary isn't only a woman but is a champion of equality, a particular champion of getting more women into power, and a champion of trying to achieve a more representative democracy. So it's our privilege from the Equality and Human Rights Commission to be working with Rosemary, the presiding office, Claire, and everybody, not only this week, but throughout the year on some of those agendas, which I think are extremely important. The other thing to start out by noting is that we've got a government with quite a long programme of activities, but within the government's programme of activities here in Wales is the goal of increasing diversity in public appointments, and a second goal of exploring options, including the possibility of quotas, to make the corridors of power more representative. So a government with some elements in its programme around the areas that we're talking about today, getting more women into powerful positions, and a presiding officer. That feels like a very auspicious background to our International Women's Day discussion today. As Anne Harrod said, we're here to launch Who Runs Wales 2012. Those of you that have been around for the last decade or so will have seen previous versions of Who Runs Wales. And this is what we're describing as a light update. If you've still got last year's edition somewhere, you'll find that some of the paragraphs are there completely unchanged. But we thought it was very important to provide an update because obviously since International Women's Day last year, we've had the Assembly elections and there have been other developments as well. So I thought I'd try and tell you what's happened since 2011. What you probably are aware of, the way these charts work, the main part of the booklet are little lines, and as you can guess, in a slightly sex stereotyped kind of way, the blue lines means that they're men in the jobs in question, and the pink lines means that there are women there. And one of the things which very consistently emerges, and I'm looking at the graph on page 10 here, this is the field of education at the bottom of the page. And when you look at the percentage of all teachers who are women, 75% are women, As you go to the rather better paid jobs of head teacher, the number drops to 56%. As you move to secondary head teachers, the number goes to 32%. Only 24% of secondary school head teachers and heads of further education colleges, it's less. So as you move up the hierarchy towards better paid, more influential, more powerful jobs, the number of women in those groups declines, and that is quite a consistent picture, whatever sector you're looking at. So what's changed? What made us think it was worthwhile reprinting this since 2011? One interesting thing that's changed is the number of secondary school teachers has gone up quite substantially from 26% to 32%. It's not a massive number of people, so it's not a huge shift, but I think it's worth noticing. In the field of education, more dramatically, we now have, for the first time ever, 2 women vice-chancellors in Aberystwyth University and Glamorgan University, and that is very significant, I think. In terms of local authorities have always been areas dominated by women, and when we published our report last year, 68% of people working in local government were women, and that's jumped up to 72%, which is really quite a big jump considering that there's 100,000 people working there. So that looks like at least 4,000 or 5,000 more women working in local government than there were last year. Some smaller changes at the top of those structures. So some developments there. We have to, of course, speak about the National Assembly today, where, as a result of the elections, there has actually been a decline in the number of Assembly members that are women, from 48% to 42%. However, again, we have to remember that when you're only talking about 60 individuals, each individual is accounting for a significant percentage of that. So what would we say about the trend overall? Really very, very little change over the year, 1 or 2 ups and downs. But I think the crucial thing is that we haven't had the progress that we want, or the progress that we need. So if we're saying we need progress, why does it matter? What difference does it make? There's many successful women in this room, and many of you that are hoping to be successful. And it is important for everybody to have the right to progress, but actually that isn't the most important reason that we are concerned about the lack of women at the top. What we know is that women operate in different ways to men. What we know is that women and men have differing viewpoints and differing perspectives. What we know is that people in power take very important decisions that affect all of us every day in Wales on the basis of their personal life, their personal experiences, the people they talk to on a day-by-day basis. And if that group of people taking those important decisions is very small and only from one background, we won't get good decisions. And one of the most controversial examples of this is that many people believe that had we had more women at the top in the banks over the last few years, we wouldn't have had the financial crisis and perhaps the deep recession that we find ourselves in today. The other thing, looking on a more positive side, that the National Assembly has been at least 40% female members since it was created, and I think one of the benefits of that is that we have seen an agenda much more focused around equality, around listening to other people's views, and thinking about children. Children, I think, is an agenda that the Assembly has particularly fostered. Just a few final comments. I think we can all see where we're going. How are we going to get there? What we know is that being well-intended is not enough. You actually need to have a plan. Nowhere in the world has the representation of women at the top, particularly in political life, but public life in general, nowhere has it changed by people just hoping for the best and thinking it might happen. You do need to have some kind of special measures, ways of achieving it. And a particularly striking example of this is set out on page 7. On page 7 of this report, unfortunately, we only need half a page to list every single female Member of Parliament from Wales since 1536. So we have had 13 female Members of Parliament representing Wales since 1536. I don't know how many pages we'd need to list off the number of male MPs we've had since the Act of Union. And you can see the ones that are highlighted in bright pink, there's 7 of them in pink and 6 of them in white. The 7 in pink were selected on women-only shortlists. So if you ever need any kind of demonstration that to make progress, you need a special measure, that is it. So what we need to change this position is we need mechanisms, we need determination, and we need imagination. And I'd like to leave you on the theme of imagination with a little bit of news about things that are happening elsewhere around the world today on International Women's Day. So in the United States of America, we've got a nice little chart about it here. In the United States of America, they're having an event to talk about how to support women leaders. In Australia, they're having an event to help the construction industry work out how it can be more appealing to women. In Canada, for the next 10 Mondays, women are not going to wear makeup as a method of boosting their confidence. Be an interesting one. I knew that would get everybody going. In Belgium, there's going to be a festival of sport. In Hong Kong, there's a group of people from Hong Kong, Australia and the United States are cycling through Cambodia to help put an end to sexual slavery. In the Netherlands, there's a musical marathon, probably appeals to you, Rosemary. And in Zimbabwe, there's a 3-day schools festival bringing together people from many schools to a platform where gender equality and development can be talked about, learnt, and some progress can be made there. We do have a calendar, actually, Rosemary, of the 22 International Women's Day events that are taking place in Wales. So that is quite a substantial number of things going on. So hopefully an inspirational day for us all, whatever we're doing, and it's a great privilege to have had the chance to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
There we are. You can hear me now. Right, I'll have to get used to this microphone. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. Next we'll hear from Anne Bainan, who became Commissioner for the Equality and Human Rights Commission in 2009, and she is also, of course, as we know, Director of Wales at BT and BT Strategic and Development Representative for Wales. Anne, diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. I'll be speaking mainly in Welsh. Diolch yn fawr. Mae'n fraint gael bod yma bore yma I ddathlu diwrnod Rhyngwladol y Merched. Nid yn unig mae'n ddiwrnod Rhyngwladol y Merched, mae hefyd yn benblwydd fy mab Griffith bore yma yn 50 oed, felly nes I drefnu hynny yn dda iawn, ynddo fe. Ond I fynd yn ôl at y sialens sydd wedi cael ei roed I ni bore yma yw beth yw'r rhwystrau. Beth sydd yn rhwystro merched rhag cyrraedd y meysydd hynny lle mae ganddyn nhw ddylanwad, lle maen nhw'n gallu creu newid. Achos, wrth gwrs, ar ddiwedd y dydd, os ych chi mewn sefyllfa lle mae gyda chi ddylanwad, chi yn gallu creu newid. Felly mae e'n bwysig bod menywod yn yr uchelfannau mwyn bod yno I fod yn rym I greu newid. A fydden ni'n dechrau gyda rhywbeth eitha mewnol. Hynny ydy bod e'n bwysig bod ni'n credu yno ni'n hunain. Nawr, mae credu yno ni'n hunain a hunain hyder yn cael ei greu gan sawl ffactor gwahanol. A mae rhan ohono fe yn deillio o gefndir unigolyn. Mae hefyd yn deillio o addysg a galluoedd a sgiliau mae bobl yn gallu I meithrin. Felly mae e'n hynod o bwysig bod pob menyw yn meithrin sgiliau a galluoedd ac yn dysgu. A mae'r broses yna ddysgu yn parhau trwy fywyd pob unigolyn. Felly mae'n rhywbeth sydd gyda ni trwy gydol yn hoes. Ac os I ni fel merched am symud ymlaen, yna mae'r rhaid I ni dysgu. A mae'r rhaid I dysgu fod yn rhan anatod a popeth I ni wneud yn y byd gwaith yn gyffredinol. A mae'r rhaid I ni yn anffodus ddysgu yn well na dynion, achos mae'r holl dystiolaeth yn dangos I ni yn cael yn marcio yn fwy anodd fel petai, fel ni'n mynd trwy'r broses. Felly mae dysgu yn handodol. O ran beth dwi wedi ddysgu yn y sector breifat, achos dwi'n teimlo bod fi yma'n rhannol oherwydd y cefndir sector breifat sydd gen I, mae'n rhaid fi ddweud ers i fi ymuno BT, dwi wedi dysgu llawer iawn o bethau nad oeddwn ni'n gwybod yn flaenorol yn y sector gyhoeddus. Mae'r llawer ohonyn nhw ynglyn â sgiliau gweinyddol, ond mae sgiliau gweinyddol yn allweddol yn y gweithle yn mwyn meithrin menywod. Felly, os nag oes gan ni sgiliau gweinyddol a arweinyddol yn y gweithlu, mae'n anodd iawn i ni felly gefnogi menywod. Un o'r pethau allweddol yw dulliau o weithio. Mae gan merched gyfrifoldebau teuluol sylweddol, ac ni'n gweld o'r ystadegau gyd bod menywod yn eu 30au canol a'i 30au hwyr. Dyna'i pryd i ni'n dueddol o adael y gweithlu oherwydd cyfrifoldebau teuluol, a mae'n anodd iawn wedyn dod nôl i'r gweithle yn arbennig i fod mewn swydd a chyfrifoldeb arbennig i'r swydd honno. Rhan o'r ateb, un o'r pethau sydd yn sgil pwysig yw gallu gweithio'n hyblyg. A un o'r pethau mae BT ni'n neud yw wedi prif ffrydio gweithio'n hyblyg i mewn i'r ffordd mae'r cwmni'n gweithio. Ddechreuodd yng Nghaerdydd nôl yn 1999 a dweud y gwir, gan dîm o ferched oedd yn gweithio yn canolfan meddalwedd ni yng Nghaerdydd, oedd yn gofod gweithio ar broblem arbennig yn deillio o newid i'r mileniwm newydd, a'r gofid oedd yna, byddai cyfrifiaduron y byd yn methu oherwydd rhyw fath o millennium bug oedd yn cael ei alw. Dath dim byd digwydd, ond oedd lot o waith yn gofod cael ei wneud. A nhw nath ofyn am weithio hyblyg. A bellach gyda ni mewn sefyllfa lle mae 70% o'n pobl ni yn gweithio'n hyblyg. A beth sy'n ddiddorol yw fod rhywbeth ddechreuodd fel rhywbeth ar gyfer menywod wedi troi yn rhywbeth mae pawb bellach yn ei gymryd yn ganiataol. Felly mae'r un i nifer o ddynion a menywod yn gweithio'n hyblyg. A dwi'n meddwl bod yn bwysig i ddynion bod yn gweithio'n hyblyg a bod ganddyn nhw fwy amser i fod gyda'i teuluoedd. Beth arall sydd dwi wedi gobeithio ddysgu amdano yw meithrin talent. Ac eto fyddwn ni yn argymell y dylai pob menyw lle mae'n bosib fod yn rhoi amser o'r neilltu i fentora menywod eraill a i fenywod sydd yn chwilio am yrfa, i chwilio am fenyw neu ddyn i mentora nhw. Felly mae meithrin talent yn allweddol a fel oedd Kate yn ei ddweud, mae rhaid i gael prosesau cryf tryloiw i feithrin talent. Mae wedi bobl wybod bod chi fel menyw yn berson gyda talent am feithrin y talent ac i chelgais i symud ymlaen. Felly mae hwnna'n allweddol. A beth arall dwi wedi ddysgu yw bod gwaith yn rhywbeth chi'n i'w wneud neu rhywbeth chi'n mynd iddo fe. Nid mynd i'r gwaith i chi, ond gwneud gwaith. A mae hwnna'n bwysig yn hermau sut ydych chi'n meithrin perfformiad bobl. Achos mae perfformiad yn deillio o beth i chi fel unigolyn yn ei gyflawni, nid faint o amser i chi'n ei dreulio yn ei wneud e. Ac dwi'n meddwl bod hwnna'n bwysig i ferched hefyd, achos os i ni'n cael yn gwerthuso ar hyn i ni'n ei gyflawni, dwi'n credu bod ni ar bob ystyriaeth yn debygol o wneud yn well. Mae yna arbrawf gath i'w wneud yn Unol Daleithiau yn Efrog Newydd gyda merched yn gweithio mewn cwmnïau cyfreithiol. A be ddigwyddodd oedd bod nhw gyd wedi cael tasg i'w gyflawni i gwsmeriad a fe ofynnwyd i'r cwsmeriad o'r marciau i'r gwaith heb wybod pwy oedd wedi wneud y gwaith a'i dyn a'i menyw a pwy ddath yn dop yn y marcio i gyd ond y menywod achos oedd hi ddim yn amlwg pwy oedd wedi wneud y gwaith. Felly chi'n gwybod, i ni'n gallu, achos bod ni'n tueddu i fod yn fwy cyfrifol, i ni'n gweithio'n galetach, mae sefyllfaoedd lle yma yn gwaith ni'n gallu cael ei werthuso yn dryloiw yn bwysig i ni, dwi'n awgrymu. Dwi'n meddwl hefyd bod rhaid i ni fel menywod hawlio llwyddiant. Mae'n rhywbeth mae dynion yn ei wneud yn dda iawn. A dwi'n gwybod bod e'n dda bod ni fel menywod yn gweithio'n well gyda'n gilydd, bod ni'n arbennig o dda am gydweithio. Ond i ni'n mynd i golli allan os nag i ni hefyd yn gallu datgan yn weddol agored a'r brydiau bod ni wedi llwyddo i gyflawni rhywbeth. Mae fi fel unigolyn yn nath hynna i ddigwydd. I ni yn gwneud i bethau ddigwydd, i ni ddim yn hawlio'r llwyddiant, mae dynion yn hawlio'r llwyddiant trwy'r amser. A mae hwnna'n gyrru negeseuon positif mas amdani nhw. Falle bod ni ddim felly'n gyrru negeseuon mor positif amdano ni'n hunain. Felly mae'n bwysig bod yn glir yn llwyddiant, mae'n bwysig mesur yn llwyddiant ni. Mae'n bwysig bod ni hefyd yn cael yn gweld yn ddefnyddiol, yn gefnogol, ond nid bod ni yna fel rhywun sydd yno fel... Ymadrodd gath i ddefnyddio'n ddiweddar i fy merch i fy hun oedd you're a comfort blanket. Wel, sorry, dwi ddim yma i fod yn comfort blanket i neb, neu fod yn fat drws ffrynt i neb. Da ni eisiau helpu, ond ni ddyle fod yn gallu dweud pam i ni yn digwydd bod y gwmpas. A mae'r ffaith dwi wedi bod fy merch i'n hunan wedi cael y sylw yna i ddweud wrth i'n ddiweddar yn neud fi'n grac dros ben. Rhwydweithio, dynion yn arbennig o dda am rhwydweithio, dyda ni ddim, achos ni eisiau mynd gatre, ni ddim yn gallu weithio trafferthu, mynd allan yn hwyr yn y nos i siarad gyda bobl allan fod yn ddiflas iawn. Ond chi'n meddwl, ar ddiwedd y dydd, mae'n rhaid chi gael eich chyrweithio, mae'n rhaid chi fod yn siarad gyda bobl, ffindo allan beth sy'n digwydd, trwy ffindio mas beth sy'n digwydd, chi'n gallu cynllunio ar gyfer eich gyrfa chi hun ac ychwanegu gwerth. A peth arall pwysig hefyd, fyddwn ni'n awgrymu, mae'n rhaid i ni gael llais awdurdod. A bron pob menyw dwi wedi siarad gyda hi, maen nhw wedi cael y profiad yma. Chi mewn pwyllgor, mae yna drafodaeth yn digwydd. Mae'r rhan fwyaf bobl yn y pwyllgor yn y cyfarfod yn ddynion, o bosib. Chi fel mae yn dweud rhywbeth, a mae pobl yn anwybyddu beth chi wedi dweud. Ym mhen yw hanner awr, mae yna ddyn yn dweud yn union o'r un peth bwydwch chi. Mae hwnna'n syniad ffantastig. Mae'r rhaid ni'n neud hwnna. Mae llais awdurdod y dyn wedi dod trwyddo. Mae'r rhaid i ni felly, fel menywod, greu llais awdurdod. A mae hynny'n deillio mynd yn ôl eto i'n sgiliau ni, a'n galluoedd ni, a'r parch mae'n rhaid i ni greu i ni'n hunain fel cydweithwyr a fel arweinwyr hefyd. Fyddwn ni hefyd yn awgrymu bod rhaid i ni weld dynion fel cefnogwyr, rhai dynion. Hynny yw, hoffwn ni'n fawr iawn gwybod pwy yw'r dyn yma fan hyn. Sydd wedi ar y clawr. Nawr, beth mae'r dyn yna, pwy bynnag yw wedi mynd allan a wedi dangos i gefnogaeth i ferched i gael y bleidlais. Nawr, yn y cyfnod yna, oedd beth eitha herfeiddiol i'w wneud. Mae eisiau mwy o ddynion fel yna, achos mae dynion sy'n deall pam bod yn bwysig i gael merched yn y gweithlu yn hanfodol bwysig i ni fel ffyrdd o gyrraedd llefydd awdurdod. Mae'r dynion da yn deall, y dynion sydd yn creu rhwystrau sydd ddim yn bositif yw'r dynion sydd yn cwestiynu gallu i hunain. Y dynion sydd ddim mor dda â ni. Felly, pwydwch y gadael i neb weithio chi bod chi ddim digon da, achos fydden ni'n awgrymio unrhyw ddyn sy'n gweud hynny wrtho chi, gan fe mae'r broblem nid gyda chi. Ond, mae'r holl ffordd o nabod a cefnogwyr yn bwysig, creu rhyw fath o rwydwaith. Ond hefyd, jyst rhaid gorffen ar y pwynt yma, mae'n bwysig bod ni hefyd yn cefnogi menywod eraill. A hefyd, os oes yna fenyw sydd ddim yn cefnogi menywod eraill, mae gyda ni gyfrifoldeb i dynnu sylw at hynny, achos mae yn wylltio i bod rhai menywod ddim yn dangos cefnogaeth i fenywod eraill ac yn gweld i gyrfa nhw eu hunain yn bwysicach yna creu unrhyw fath o ddiflastod neu i ddweud unrhyw beth sydd ddim yn gyffyrddus i bobl trwy falle cefnogi menywod eraill. Felly dwi'n meddwl bod e'n hanfodol i ni fel menywod fod yn uchelgeisiol i ddeall beth yw'n sgiliau ni, symud ymlaen, ond i wneud hynny gan gofio bod rhaid i ni ddangos cefnogaeth i fenywod eraill ar hyd y ffordd. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch am. Diolch yn fawr. Well, we've already got some good themes going here. We've got childcare, we've got positive discrimination, flexible working hours, and the need to create our own authority. Next, we'll hear from Laura McAllister, Chair of Sport Wales, who's also the Professor of Governance at the University of Liverpool School of Management. Laura, diolch.
Diolch, Angharad. I agree with so much of what's already been said, so I'm trying to think of how to add some value, really, to the conversation here, because there's always a danger that we all say the same things, really. But I was going to start, because I went to an International Women's Day dinner last night with the Secretary of State for Wales, who we should also mention is the first female Secretary of State for Wales, and she was telling us that she was the first women's minister in the John Major government, which I'd kind of forgotten, but I think it is technically true. I'm not sure how much attention that government gave to women's issues, but we were discussing women's issues and the position of women generally in Welsh society, and I made the point that I was getting slightly concerned at some of the rhetoric around how much progress has been made. And that's not to deny any of this. You know, it's a wonderful achievement that the Assembly has reached the levels of female representation that it has. But as Kate's publication has shown here, you know, there is enormous structural disadvantage faced by women, not only in public life, but in their personal lives and in the private sector and in the third sector as well. And I get uncomfortable with that rhetoric about progress because it's essentially academically a kind of boom and bust model of equality. You know, we should never forget that the representation levels of women here in the Assembly have come about because of positive action by 2 of the 4 political parties. And, you know, all credit to Labour and Plaid Cymru for doing that. But we know that as soon as you row back from positive action, you usually suffer a decline in the numbers. And the only reason the numbers didn't decline more substantially this time was because of the electoral rhythms of some key parties. So, you know, I think we've got to be really careful about that whole agenda and be a bit more realistic about where we are with this at the moment. I think the kind of label of being a leader as a woman sits relatively uncomfortable on our shoulders because we're not brought up to believe that you know, it's a good thing to be a leader, and we do feel slightly uncomfortable with being labelled this, and I think we've got to get over that, quite frankly, because only by acknowledging that all of us and all of you are leaders in your field can we actually act as good, valuable role models to other women coming through. And I know from my own experience, you know, all of my role models really were personal ones from my family and friends, and probably from my teachers and my coaches in sport. And it would have been great, you know, to have had a pool of other role models from which I could have drawn in any of those fields. But I think probably women were quite shy about advertising their own successes as well. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. For me as well, it's about being honest, you know. I was chatting to some colleagues here in the Assembly last week, and I was saying to them that, you know, don't ever think for a moment that those of us who are supposedly leaders in our field don't have the same insecurities and worries and crises of confidence that you all have in your work, or indeed some of the other women you work with. Very rarely does a day go by without me feeling, gosh, I wasn't ready for that, or I didn't do that well, or I've made a mistake. But, you know, you learn to get over it, basically, and you learn to take it less seriously, because after all, that's what men do. They make mistakes hourly, daily, and we see them in action, but they don't get hung up about it. They don't beat themselves up about it as women do. They just move on. And actually, that is something I think we have to learn about men, is to take ourselves a little bit less seriously. And to accept that, you know, everything we do won't be perfect. I guess in terms of my own career, I'm not a great advert for sort of strategic career development, in that for me it's been about doing things that I wanted to do, first and foremost. So taking on the role as Chair of Sport Wales has set back my academic career without a shadow of a doubt, in that, you know, the last 2 years trying to juggle a 2-day public appointment with a pretty much full-time academic job is nigh on impossible. So something's got to give, and unfortunately it's been my research. Don't tell that to the University of Liverpool at the moment, but you know, on a practical level, we all know that most of the sponsored bodies and the public bodies in Wales are run by men of a certain age, you know, men aged between 55 and 65. Who are retired or semi-retired. So they can operate in a very different way to somebody like myself who's trying to work professionally at the same time. But, you know, that's a good thing as well, because it means you come into an organisation with different ambitions and different aspirations. It's about empowering people around you, because clearly I can't do it all as chair of the organisation, and neither should I. So I'm much clearer about delegation and about creating a much more diverse team around me. And I think that is another important lesson I've learned from sport, more than anything, which is not to surround yourself with people who are like you. And that might mean you don't need a completely all-women team as much as you don't need a completely all-male team. You know, there needs to be a pluralism and a diversity and a balance of skills and ability around you to be able to do what you hope to do. And because my career hasn't been neatly linear, you know, I haven't sort of gone for the obvious next step all the time. I've just taken opportunities that have come my way that I've fancied doing, quite frankly. That's meant I've been prepared to make mistakes as well, and to accept that that will be part and parcel of what you do. Because when you go out there and you take on new roles, you're unsure whether you're able to do it. Kate mentioned, I think, that the women are less likely to take on roles unless they're absolutely certain they can. And I think that's a mistake, you know. I think we have to take on more roles that we're unsure we can fulfill, and then be prepared to do what I said a moment ago, which is make mistakes, learn from them, and move on. Again, sport is a fabulous case study for this. I often think this, you know, when I played international football, we'd have a debrief after every game, and it would be brutal, believe me, you know, absolutely brutal. Notational analysis of every mistake you'd made in the game. You know, it's hard at the time, but it is a fabulous way of getting things out of your system as well. You know, you see it up there on the screen, you see the stats about how many passes you've misplaced and how many tackles you haven't made and so on, but you move on. And after that session, the team is completely focused on the next challenge and the next task. And I think that is a really important lesson for us all. You know, file away your mistakes. Don't worry about them. Go home, you know, kick the cat, or, you know, have a big glass of wine or whatever you need to relax. But don't dwell on them, you know, because everybody out there, believe me, is making mistakes all the time around you. And it's about how you respond to those rather than how you dwell on them. Advice, or, you know, probably just some observations about what's worked for me, really, is I think we all have to be ourselves. Learn from other people, and especially other women, and pick up on the things that they do well. But don't try and copy it, because the DNA of each of us is fundamentally different, and some things just don't work, quite frankly, if you try to transpose them from somebody else to yourself. Ultimately, you can only be successful, I think, by being yourself. And if that means dressing differently or behaving differently or speaking differently, then just do it, because, you know, you've got to where you've got to because you are a good working person and you've succeeded in the tasks that have been set for you so far. So don't change fundamentally, because I just can't see any evidence that works for women or men, quite frankly. Don't be afraid to show real passion and enthusiasm for what you do. It's not terribly fashionable, apparently, to do this, but, you know, I find, you know, when I talk about sport, I can't help but be passionate, because, you know, it's been such a fundamental part of my life. And, you know, as I said a moment ago, probably taught me everything I know. You know, I've learnt more in 2 years of chairing Sport Wales than I learnt in 12 years of academia, without a shadow of a doubt, because, you know, it's practical and it's real and it's operational and it's strategic and so on. But show some passion for what you do, you know, and put some emotion into it, you know. You'd be surprised how compelling that is for the wider audience out there. My best experiences as chair of Sport Wales undoubtedly have been when I've worked with children. You know, just going out and going to foundation phase schemes and, you know, doing a play to learn exercise with them. I mean, and I went with Leighton to a play to learn exercise in a school in Pont-Llanfraith, and it was great. I tried to get Leighton to join in, but he wouldn't. But I did every exercise with the kids, and it was fantastic, because just to see their faces, and they've all been told somebody important is coming to see them, and they think it's all going to be very boring and so on. But then if you join in with them and, you know, take your shoes off and have a go with them, you know, the kids absolutely love it. And, you know, I find that very easy because I'm passionate about what I do. And I think, you know, don't be frightened to show that energy, you know, that real kind of intensity and enthusiasm, because I really do think it's probably one of the biggest assets in women generally. I think we can do it more easily than men in lots of cases. Ego, I'm constantly perplexed by ego in the workplace, because I just can't see any situations where that is a big asset to what you do. You know, kind of get over it, really. You know, we're all in positions because we've got something to offer, but we're not the perfect specimens. You know, we're not exemplars of what we do. We all, as I keep saying, make mistakes, really. And, you know, don't take it personally. Don't sort of take your ego to work and park it on the desk. You know, it's not of great value. The real values, I think, for being a good leader are emotional intelligence, which women have in spades, quite frankly. And I don't want to be scathing about male colleagues, but I am constantly shocked at the low levels of emotional intelligence that male leaders show, you know, constantly. And I pointed out to them as well, you know, it seems to me incredible that men just don't seem to, some men don't seem to have this ability just to see when somebody needs a bit of praise rather than a rap on the knuckles, really. So, you know, women are great at doing that generally. Not all women, again, but most women are great at showing real emotional intelligence. And the other thing I think for being a leader is to show some calmness. You know, having just said you show energy and enthusiasm and passion. You know, when you are in certain circumstances, the biggest asset of all is calmness and consistency. You know, Adele might say the opposite now. She's on our board, but you know, I'm not a leader who, you know, in a board meeting will, you know, hit the table and shout at people, and because actually what you achieve by that, it's about having consistent messages, being calm when you're up against it and when you're going to take a risky decision, being clear about what you're trying to achieve and so on, and really getting some sort of assurance within your group that you are somebody that can be trusted to lead the organisation forward, really. And I think there are so many women out there that do this very well, but ultimately it's not recognised at the moment. So just to finish, I guess, my advice would be relax. Don't beat yourselves up about mistakes you make and things you do less well than you'd like to have done. Analyse it mentally. Get a good support group around you, which is where the mentoring thing comes in, really. Get them to be frank with you, get them to give you feedback and take it, but then move on. Don't dwell on it. Think about what you've learned and move on for the next challenge. We know that we're judged more critically than men. I've had some fascinating experiences of that over the last 2 years. But, if you stick to your guns and show some of those qualities that I've just described, I think the potential to be better leaders than men is there for almost all women, in my view.
Diolch, Laura. Thank you very much. And finally, our final speaker today is the Chief Executive and Clerk of the National Assembly for Wales. It's Claire Clancy. Diolch, thank you.
Thank you. I find it almost impossible to believe that I'm old enough to have been in the public sector for 35 years, but I have. When I left school, I did a little rebellion. I'd been in a girls' grammar school and was expected to go to university. And for various reasons of my own at the time, I thought, well, blow that, I'm not doing that. And believe it or not, the civil service was where I escaped to as an alternative for going to university at the time. And I've, as I say, been a public servant ever since. I've done a mix of jobs, some policy, working with ministers, writing white papers, all that sort of stuff, but mostly delivery. So I was, at the end of the 1980s, Chief Executive of Powys Training and Enterprise Council. I've been Chief Executive of Companies House. I've also worked in the Patent Office. So mostly delivery work, and indeed it was that delivery experience which was why I was recruited to the job that I'm in now. I am immensely proud of my career, but most of all the feeling that I have is one of such privilege and gratitude, really, for having had the opportunities that I've had and for having had the investment in my own development. And the barriers that I want to talk about are the barriers that at various times have been inside me, and some of these barriers that I think I have had to overcome, wanted to overcome, and that I would encourage you to think about breaking down and overcoming. But I do want to talk about one set of barriers that I think are actually quite important and there to protect us. People who work with me know that I have a particular mantra that I remind people of frequently. 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. And that's why I'm talking about these internal barriers, because I think some of these internal barriers may have external causes, but it's up to us whether or not we let them get to us. So 3 in particular I want to talk about. The first is fear. Fear of taking risks, fear of failing, as Laura talked about, fear of being criticised. And so a few examples. One when I was about actually to compete for the job at Companies House through an open recruitment. And my boss at the time, who was a woman, Director General in the Department of Trade and Industry, did something that I thought was wholly wrong. She was going to be on my interview panel a couple of weeks later. So I had a choice. Now, I was afraid. I was scared, of the consequences. But I chose to talk to her about what I thought was wrong. And a couple of weeks later, she appointed me to be Chief Executive of Companies House. So it clearly did not, in the end, in that circumstance, do harm to me. So, I was able to weigh up that risk, conquer the fear and talk to her. I did just, though, want to say that we have to think about how we do these things. And I also think back to a time in my past, actually, when I worked for another excellent woman who was regional director in the government office for the South West. And she was so hardworking, so conscientious. And again, I disagreed with something. But the way in which I challenged her, looking back now, was so inappropriate, so wrong, so confrontational, the banging the table type thing, sort of indignation. And I did harm that time. So I think there's something about learning about, yes, we need to conquer our fear and overcome our fear that we might fail or be criticised, but to do it in appropriate ways and to think it through. I think also to be prepared to take those risks. Again, in Companies House, we at one stage had a major difficulty with delivery of IT. Sounds familiar. It's something that we live with, I think. But it was necessary to take a huge risk and to terminate a particular contract. And I was the accounting officer, and it was really scary. And I think you have to do the things that you need to do to take that bold decision. Actually, the risk that was greater in that circumstance was doing nothing, avoiding taking the difficult decision. So that's my first barrier, internal fear, and finding the right ways ourselves to overcome that. The second internal barrier is pride. At different times in my career, I've gone and cleaned the toilets. When I was chief executive of Paris Tech, we had visitors coming, toilets needed sorting. I did it. If I have to do something because the job requires it, I don't care what it is, you need to get it done. And I think it's about the status point, really, and I think women are better than men at doing this, but being prepared to be entirely flexible to meet the needs of what's expected of you. And also, again, picking up the theme we've heard already, being willing to admit our mistakes and being willing to learn. Organisations are never going to improve if the leadership isn't prepared to say, we got that wrong, it's not good enough, we need to improve, and this is how we're going to do it. If the culture you engender in your organisation is one of being afraid of admitting mistakes, it's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. So not being too proud to say, my gosh, I got that wrong. And then my third internal barrier is not being put off. So when I first came to Wales at the end of the 1980s, I'd been working in Sheffield, and I was sent, really, because they couldn't find anybody to set up a training and enterprise council for Powys in mid-Wales. So I was sent over. And when I got there, I really rather liked it. And there was a private sector board of men who were responsible for the tech. And they were pretty horrified at getting me. I was quite young, I was a woman, I was a civil servant. I had virtually all the ingredients that they turned their noses up. And so, in their minds, I was there for 6 months to get the thing going, and then they knew what they wanted. It was really crucial for me not to be put off by that. And, that's one example. This happens repeatedly in my career. In fact, it started at school, actually, when my teacher told me I had no chance of passing my maths O-level. So I got an A grade. So I think sometimes, what we need to do is to say, bugger you, I am good enough and I am going to do this, and not to allow ourselves to be put off. So they're my 3 barriers that I would encourage you to break down. The one that I think is important to pay attention to and to allow to protect us is we all get questions inside us, or I get questions inside my head. Do I really want to do this? And I do wonder myself whether this is why, or one of the explanations why we don't have so many senior women in the most senior positions, for example, as permanent secretaries of government departments. I know many senior women across the civil service, and I know some of their reasons why they don't want to be permanent secretaries. I think life is a bit like having to juggle lots of balls. And let's say that those balls are work, family and friends, health, integrity. Now, for me, the work ball is made of rubber. And, you know, there have been times in my life when I've had issues, problems, and I've dropped that work ball. But every time it's bounced back and I've got the ball back again. I think those other balls, for me, are made of glass. And you drop some of those, you know, you drop integrity. How do you carry on living with yourself? And I think, and family and friends, you know, and I'll freely admit there have been choices I've made in my career when I've dropped one of those glass balls and you never get it back. So some of these choices, you know, it's about life, isn't it? It's work in the context of life. Be sure about those choices that you're making, because some of them matter a great deal. And in my experience, the work one you can recover, and some of these others you just can't. I want to finish kind of on that theme by reading you a poem. It's written by somebody called Donna Makova, who's an American lady, and it's about living with purpose and breaking free of limitations that others or we might place on ourselves. And it's about making the difference that probably only we as individuals can make. And I understand she wrote the poem the night her father died, and in her words, he died with a shrug. And she says in her book that his heart was hollow and vacant of dreams. He was convinced he didn't matter. And so she wrote this poem. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. Thank you very much to our four panellists. Diolch yn fawr iawn i'r bedair ohonoch chi. A ni wedi cael tipyn i feddwl amdano fyna, ac i'n hysbrydoli ni hefyd, dwi'n meddwl. Wel, mae nawr lan i chi i gyd. Mae yna gyfle nawr i chi gyd i ofyn cwestiynau. There's now a chance for all of you here to ask questions, so please feel free to do so. And who would like to start?
My name is Mary Powell Chandler. I'm the Regional Programme Manager for Save the Children in Wales. I wish I could start every day like today. It's been fantastic. On the radio this morning, they said there was a solar storm expected that would be very powerful. And I think rather than meeting a comfort blanket here, it would have its own energy and passion here. And I'm sure we could fight it off very easily. Next week, Save the Children is launching a campaign called Mums United. It's about some research we did about certain groups of mums who are going to be worse off under the UK government's universal credit scheme, specifically mums who want to work more than 16 hours a week and mums who are the second wage earners in the family. It's due to reductions in childcare costs, how benefits are taken into account when they're working, their earnings against benefits, and also having benefits removed quite quickly when they start work. And what I want to ask the panellists, although we're looking at breaking barriers and so on, what are your thoughts on what we can do for mums who want to work here in Wales, but who are struggling to do so?
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Kate, would you like to start?
I don't quite know where to start in that. I think one of the things which has emerged from the contributions really from my three colleagues here, I think you've all given really, really good and powerful advice, and I think every tip that each of you has given has been really powerful. But I think it rather suggests that more of the solution is in our own hands than I believe the evidence indicates that is the case. Now, I don't think probably there's a difference practically between us. I think we've all come with our speeches today. But I think there are some fundamental structural problems around women's access to work, the amount we get paid, the tax rules, the benefit systems, and those kind of things. And I think there are a number of organisations around Wales that help and support and empower women in the kind of ways that have been talked about here. But one of the things that I'm very interested in, and the Commission is very interested in, around the benefit system and about the whole spending of money, is when people like governments make decisions about how to spend their money, they now have a legal obligation to assess the impact of their spending decisions on particular groups of people, whether it's on women or disabled people, and some of the disability benefit cuts are, in a similar category to the ones that you describe. And one of the things that the Commission is extremely keen to do, and we have been doing some very, very intensive work with the Treasury, and we're going to do some work with the Welsh Government as well, is to say, do you realise that this is a serious legal requirement, that when you decide to cut benefits, you must make an assessment, and that must be a transparent assessment as to whether this is going to have a negative impact on a particular group in the population. And if you decide to go ahead with that decision, then that has to be out in the open as a political decision to be assessed. So I'm not sure that that quite is the answer you were looking for, but I think it does kind of fall into the kind of main category of what I wanted to say in this answering up, that while we should do all these things to empower ourselves and to improve our own chances, I think there is a fundamental problem that discrimination against women exists, that men don't want to use power. There are structural reasons why women haven't succeeded as much as we would like, to do with the caring responsibilities and who pays for that, and maternity leave and your access to the job when you've had time off. Something which, quite interestingly for International Women's Day, hasn't been mentioned yet, the issue of violence against women, where women are much more likely than men to suffer violence in their own homes. So there are a lot of fundamental problems there, and I slightly worry, and actually we've had this discussion, Laura, on the group where we're working around public appointments together, is that you can put an enormous amount of effort into building up women's capacity and strength and acceptability. And I know there's an organisation in Wales called Women Making a Difference who've done a huge amount of that and got all these fabulous women ready for public appointments. But you still won't actually get that public appointment if the demand side, to use an economic analogy, you're putting all your effort into the supply side. If the demand side is unwilling to contemplate people that don't look in the mould that they wanted them to be, that can be quite a demoralising situation. So that's the thought anyway.
Laura, did you want to add to that?
Well, I agree entirely, and I think Kate was gently saying, maybe we have all focused a bit more on empowering ourselves and our colleagues rather than looking at structural and system change. But I think the two have to go hand in hand without a doubt, But and they are related, because if you look back, I mean, I don't want to make this too political, but if you look back at the 2010 UK general election, it was a hideously male affair, from the beginning of the campaign to the outcome and the appointment to the cabinet, really. So if you don't have women leaders in a general sense within each of the political parties and within the candidate base, then you simply will get decisions being made which are directly discriminatory towards women. So virtually all of the cuts are shaped in a way that they have a more severe impact on women because of where women are placed within the workforce and because of their economic circumstances and so on. So the two areas are related, clearly, but I think, obviously we were talking about what we might be able to do rather than, the broader context, I guess.
And isn't it the case that childcare costs are so expensive and they're so prohibitive, really, that stops women from being able to work, even if they wanted to?
I think that's right. I mean, I was a single mother for 5 years, but I was always able to earn enough to have somebody to look after my children. But it's a continual worry, even when you can do that. It's a concern because, you know, we all feel that guilt, don't we, that we should be there. Well, you know, I don't think my children have suffered by my not being there, looking back now. But, you know, at the time I remember having these horrible pangs of guilt that I wasn't there. But if you are a woman who is has very, very low income, I think it's a very uncomfortable and hostile place to be. And I think we need to take that into account. I think you're right to raise it. I'm really pleased that you have. But how can we show some sort of solidarity? Is there anything we can do? I agree with Laura. If we have women at the top, these things wouldn't happen as much as they are happening. So we've kind of going back to this, you know, sorority approach. We need to support those women as well who probably can't be here today for, again, structural reasons. It's not easy. The one thing that perplexes me is local government, to take an example, but it's where the representation is particularly poor. And if you look at the way local government functions, the times the meetings are held, the lack of support for councillors, what women would want to be on a council, let alone be able to be, you know? So I think that we need to rethink, actually, very significantly, the way key parts of our life in Wales operates. And I think local government, to me, seems to be the one I would go for, to say, how can we work with local government? How can we reduce the number of councillors? I mean, it's going on in Anglesey. They are going to reduce, I understand, the number of councillors to about 2/3, hip hip hooray. They are also thinking of having multi-member wards in the council so that will allow more gender balance. That's part of the reasoning behind it. So there is some thinking going on up there because they've got themselves in such a mess, which, by the way, men did create. Yeah? So they are trying to get out of it by rethinking it and having more women participating. So, you know, maybe we can't today do much to help those women you're mentioning, but let's think about those structural organisations that if we don't tackle them at some point, then we will perpetuate that kind of discrimination.
Just quickly to say, I think as employers, and I'm sure many of you work within organisations, it's important to remember these considerations, for example, when we've got vacancies to fill, and that we don't automatically jump to conclusions about what the requirements of those jobs are. And I think, you know, at different levels in an organisation, it's possible to draw this to the HR team or management's attention and to make sure that we do have flexible working practices. In the Assembly, we have very flexible working, term time working, flexi working and other arrangements. It isn't the whole solution. None of these things are the whole solution. But I think if from within organisations we can encourage employers to be more creative, good employers, that will help.
Thank you for your question. Oh, thank you, diolch.
Helo, Elin Wyn, ac fi'n credu yn y cyswllt yma, falle byddwn ni'n gweud bod fi'n aelod o Fwrdd yr Iaith Gymraeg, achos beth sy'n ni'n hoffi siarad amdano yw penodiadau cyhoeddus a bod yn rhan o fywyd cyhoeddus yng Nghymru. I ni wedi gweld bod cynlleied o fenywod yn rhan o fywyd cyhoeddus yng Nghymru, ond mae eisiau dechrau'n rhywle. A fi'n credu yr cwestiwn yma o ddiffyg hyder a ble mae pobl yn dechrau ar yr llwybr i gael penodiadau cyhoeddus. A fi'n gwybod bod Women Making a Difference wedi wneud rhywfaint o waith gyda'r unigolion ar hyn. Ond yn nghyswllt di, beth nes i wneud oedd yn hytrach na mynd ar Cymdeithas Rhieni, yr ysgol, a wneud cacennau ar gyfer y ffair haf, mynd ar y bwrdd llywodraethwyr. Achos beth sy'n tueddu ddigwydd, mae menywod yn mynd ar y Cymdeithas Rhieni a dynion yn mynd ar y bwrdd llywodraethwyr yr ysgol. A byddwn ni hefyd yn annog pobl sydd, mae dyn ni lot fawr o ferched ifanc yma heddi, sydd falle ddim a phlant, ond mae digon o lefydd gwag ar gyrff llywodraethol ysgolion ar gyfer pobl sy'n cael eu penodi trwy'r awdurdod lleol. Mae'r awdurdodau lleol, maen nhw'n wirioneddol desperate i gael bobl i gymryd y llefydd yna ar gyrff llywodraethol ysgolion. A mae hwnna wedyn i fi, byddwn ni'n gweud, yn gam cynta ar y broses o fod yn rhan o fywyd cyhoeddus ac yn rhoi'r profiad o weithio mewn corff llywodraethol, mewn pwyllgor o bwys sy'n rhoi'r profiad i chi wedyn i symud mlaen ar gyfer penodiad cyhoeddus arall. So na'r unig beth o'n i eisiau gweud, dim cwestiwn mewn gwirionedd. Diolch.
Wel, na fi'n meddwl bod e'n bwynt difyr iawn, a dwi'n meddwl bod e'n mor wir. Fi mewn grŵp o ffrindiau, mamau yn yr ysgol, ac mae'r mamau'n ymwneud â'r PTA a mae'r dynion ar y bwrdd llywodraethu. A yn sgil hynny, dwi'n meddwl beth sy'n digwydd yw bod ni'n creu y byd yma lle mae'r fenyw trwy'r amser yn cael ei dal nôl, achos mae'n cael ei gweld fel rôl o fod yr un sy'n neud y cacennau, ac mewn stondin fach, lle mae'r dynion i rai mewn siwts sy'n troi lan i'r cyfarfodydd go iawn, lle mae'r penderfyniadau pwysig yn cael ei wneud dros addysg y plant, sef y peth mae'r mamau yn poeni amdano fwyaf mewn gwirionedd. But would you like to... Ellen was mentioning there about how to get more women onto the public jobs.
I think one of the things we find is that women like to do something that's got a practical outcome. And the cakes and making people feel good on the day is certainly part of it. I think the other thing that we know about public appointments is that actually we're on one of these journeys, some good work done, quite a long way still to go. And I think the good work done is that now it is actually the case, if you look at the statistics, that a really quite significant percentage, not half, but not that far short of half of people being appointed to public appointments are women. However, that isn't the case when you look at who are the chairs of the public bodies, which are the highly paid public appointments. So women are very largely recruited to particular kinds of public appointments, particularly in health, and particularly for ones that aren't paid, and particularly for ones that aren't the chair. So again, I don't think it's a supply side thing of equipping the women. I think it's a question of influencing those panels, and there is some work going to be going on, and any public appointment that's advertised after the 1st of April this year will be subject to different kind of procedure, and I can't remember all the details of it at the moment, but that is around affecting the panel that's making those decisions rather than improving the quality of the women, because as you say, and women making a difference are saying, actually we've got fantastic women out there, we need to make sure that the panels are able to see them as that.
If it's difficult then to have positive discrimination within political parties, shouldn't it be the case that within public appointments, and especially boards, that there should be complete equality? What do you think, Laura? That if you have 8 members of a board, 4 should be men and 4 should be women, and if a woman leaves, should always be replaced by a woman, or that there's always that equality there.
Well, I've got some sympathy for that, but I don't think we've quite exhausted some of the existing processes yet, which is some of the work that Kate and I and others are talking about at the moment. For me, there's an enormous amount of missionary work that we should be doing, really, in terms of recruiting women to public bodies, and we are starting to do some of that, but it's very informal, and this is always how appointments have been made traditionally in a small country like Wales. There's been a lot of informality about sounding out people and encouraging them to apply in the first instance, and I actually don't think that's such a bad thing, because it's not bias or favouritism just to actually talk to good women out there in my field. We're about to start a new round of recruitment to replace some board members. I've spoken to our senior management team and said, go out and talk to some women that we know are out there who have experience but might not interpret their experience as being relevant to a national public board. And I think that's a really important issue because, as Aileen said a moment ago, women do have experience at a whole host of levels, but they almost kind of downplay that experience mentally for themselves. They say, well, I only assist with the maithrin, or I only do this. Whereas some of that experience is really transferable strategically. And if a woman has some of the other requisite skills to be a good board member, I would happily, as a member of the interview panel for my board, overlook the fact that she may not have had senior management experience, which is always there on the Welsh Government's kind of checklist. If there's evidence of transferability from voluntary third sector, even personal and family life, really. But at the moment, we're not encouraging women to see themselves in that way. That's a real issue for me. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, really, is this point about identifying women that who have the potential, young or old, or middle-aged, and saying to them, look, have you thought about being a member of a public board? Have you thought about what you can bring to this? And it's not the kind of old tap on the shoulder that used to go on transparent public appointments, years ago. It's really just about trying to broaden the base of supply to make sure that some of the good mechanisms that we have with a more equality-focused public appointment scheme are allowed to flourish, really. And at the moment, we haven't got that right. Your point, Angharad, about quotas, personally, I think that should remain on the table. I didn't particularly agree with the Lord Davis of Abersoch report, which was talking about kind of, very gradualist approaches to increasing women on the board, with quotas kind of the worst case scenario. I mean, in terms of sport, our governing bodies are appallingly unequal. And my message to them, the governing bodies that run each sport, so for example, Football Association of Wales, Welsh Rugby Union, Athletics Wales, I said to all the chief executives, we've now given you a modernisation target. Do it, and if not, we'll consider quotas. So they know that that is on the table at the end of this period, And I think it's a stick approach aligned with a carrot approach, if you see what I mean. So they've had due warning, but I think you need to retain that. But maybe we're not quite there with the public appointments process yet.
Just to go back to this question of identifying talent. And I saw this being done in a very large corporation, actually, in a very structured way, where they actually appointed somebody, and this was in Time Warner, where they appointed a woman from an ethnic background to look for ethnically based executives. And she actually placed quite a number in posts, and that's exactly what she did. She would go around and find people who hadn't seen themselves in those roles. So that's all she did. She was almost like a matchmaker. She would also go around all the universities and look for talent. So it was seen as a talent development role, which is quite an interesting way of putting it. So the way they were looking at it was, if we don't do this, we're missing out on talent. So it wasn't about we must have these people in there. There is talent there. So you recognise talent and transferable skills. Again, that's a key issue, that there will be people who have skills that they are deploying in their personal lives, whether it's in their churches or in their communities or in whatever activity they do, and don't realise those are transferable. So you actually need them to see their totality, their skills base as their whole skills base, and not see it compartmentalised into personal skills and work skills.
Right. And next question.
Lila Haynes, Oxfam, Cymru. It is International Women's Day, and so far we have perhaps rightly concentrated on our position here as women in Wales. However, I think we ought to remember that millions of women around the world are facing an entirely different sort of set of life chances. They're dying in childbirth, as you can see if you go to the exhibition Birthrights over in the Assembly, in the Senate building today. But they're also positively, the majority of the world's farmers, they're traders, they're full-on mothers and grandmothers, etc. I'd like to ask the panel what you think women in Wales could do to reach out to support the development of women in the rest of in the less developed world. What one thing you think women in Wales could do, perhaps in your own field, perhaps as a nation, perhaps as the women of Wales?
Claire, would you like to start? Thank you for your question. Diolch.
Very briefly, I think raising awareness and making sure these matters stay in people's consciousnesses is something that we can do both at a personal level, but also again through our work. And it is all too easy to get engrossed in our priorities and our ambitions, and to forget that there are people in the world who will never have the opportunities that we've had. So I think, raising awareness, making sure it's something that gets talked about in the Assembly, of course, Assembly members making sure it's something that is given at public attention through the work of committees and plenary is really important.
The thing that comes to my mind is the excellent work that's been done in Wales in the work in Lesotho, and it's something that's been going on for a number of times and a number of years, and it seems to me that we need to be doing tangible things, again delivering activity on the ground, and there does seem to me to be a programme there which maybe we need to do more to support. and particularly I would suggest in the health arena, I mean, mentioning infant mortality, the number of women dying in childbirth, I think if we were to reinforce our activities in Lesotho around the health agenda, that could be a tangible thing we could be doing. We've already got the links, already got the thing in place, and I think the Welsh Government's Africa project, again, is part of that. So I absolutely agree with you. We need to be looking outside of Wales, learning what goes on in other parts of the world. But that particular piece of Africa has been something that Wales has been very linked to for a long time, and I'd like to see us doing more.
I was going to mention that project as well. There are a whole number of voluntary sector organisations coordinated with WCVA around linking with Africa and the Congo in particular, where the position of rape and sexual violence is extremely great. So on an individual basis, there are plenty of places that people can become involved. On a more structural basis, ensuring that we play our part in the UN infrastructure so that countries like ours, where we're more fortunate, where things are much better for women, that we're in there and we get the chance to meet, albeit a very tiny number of us meeting a very tiny number of women from those other countries about every 5 years when they have those UN conferences, so that we kind of keep moving the agenda on.
Well, there's a lot from sport that is internationally transferable, obviously, and I did something yesterday with the British Council and LOCOG, the organising committee for the London Games, around the International Inspirations programme, which is designed as a development programme using the lever of sport to create spin-offs, obviously, globally from the London Olympics. And that's such an important thing for women, you know, because sport can be a lever to actually educate women as well, so that they learn basic skills outside the kind of formal educational environment and develop personal self-confidence and so on through doing that. So Tani Gray-Thompson was we were recording viral videos yesterday to use via Twitter and Facebook and so on. And some of that will be launched in an exhibition called Inspired by Sport, which I think is in a month's time. But, you know, I think that's really fundamental, because sport is an international concept, really, and, you know, a very gender unequal one at the moment.
Diolch. And I think we've probably got time for one more question here.
Good morning, and thank you for the inspirational stories this morning from some women leaders. I agree with everything that's been said. I'll put my cards on the table here. I'm Adele Baumgart. I'm a freelance consultant, but I'm here today really representing the Women's Equality Network. And I'm firmly in the camp of positive action and quotas, really. So I'll just put my cards on the table. But I'm also interested in widening out the concept of leadership, because we've really talked this morning about leadership in terms of position. And one of the things in my day job that's been really interesting is actually working and being able to influence and lead organisations and decision-making without positions of power from anywhere within an organisation and from outside an organisation. So really, what's your experience of that, and how important do you think that is? And then secondly, gender equality, as we've heard this morning, is quite complicated. It's got structural and institutional and all kinds of cultural complexities to it. And one of the things that I find in the work that I do is that there are very few people left who understand those things and are unpicking them, even where there are good women policy and leadership, you know, in positions of power. So how are your organisations and the people who make policy and decisions engaging and tapping into expertise that can help you unpick this? You know, you never meet a woman in the street who says, I've been indirectly discriminated against on the grounds of my sex because of where my hospital is and it's difficult to get to my appointment. She'll say it's just really tough because of childcare or buses or whatever it is. And you need people within policy and decision-making bodies who can unpick that and put it back on the gender equality agenda. So how do or should organisations go about doing that?
Anne, maybe you'd like to start with that one.
Right. In terms of dealing with the entirety of the agenda, I think it comes down to a number of specific programmes that are structured to give that kind of support. Flexible working is one, but also you will have a lot of people now in the workplace with caring responsibilities for the elderly. So one of the things that certainly we do in BT is we have what we call a network we call Including You. So all you do is you sign up to the network. That gives you then regular short updates on what's going on in the world of people with caring responsibilities. And then there will be webinars where you can dial in and you will have somebody talking about dementia. What does it mean for people with dementia? Talking about multiple sclerosis. So you learn very quickly in very small chunks things you might need to know to support you. But we also then have a carer's passport. So if you are an employee and you have caring responsibilities, it's actually written out and noted in a passport, which you then sign formally with your line manager. And whatever job you then do, your passport goes with you. So it gives you some comfort and support then, that if you have to drop everything suddenly because your caring responsibilities kick in, you know, the glass ball kicks in, then that's understood and agreed. And then to go with that, we have a top tips for line managers and how to deal with it. And a lot of this is about line managers who need to have that kind of emotional intelligence that Laura was mentioning, and saying, you know, you have to have conversations with your people if you know they've got caring responsibilities. I mean, I once had a man who worked for me. It took me a year to find out he had a very disabled child. And he didn't want to admit it because he thought that was weakness on his part to say that he had a disabled child. So, you know, we need to have that emotional intelligence and understanding when people have these issues and deal with them. But you do have to have structures. So people need to know where they stand, and then you need to have the support from the top as well, I'd say, of the company to say these are important. And again, we had a big campaign in BT about 6-7 years ago on bullying, because we picked up on our care survey from our people that it was starting to emerge as an issue. And what we did was we organised an event with the chairman of the company, the chief executive of the company, individuals who suffered bullying, were all spoke and said, we're not having this, it's not acceptable. We had John McCarthy speaking about being a prisoner. It's quite interesting, some of the things he was experiencing as a prisoner when he was kidnapped were very similar to the behaviours bullies exhibited as well. You know? So we tied the two things together, and then we made it absolutely unacceptable. We put it on posters and emails and videos, and we blitzed everybody with it, and then kept measuring it. So, you know, you have to take positive action, and you have to do it in a very structured and clear way so that it makes a difference.
Can I just ask one extra question with regards to flexible hours? Because I'm fully in agreement with flexible hours. I think they're completely necessary in today's world, and especially for women. But within work with us now, I found that because women and men too obviously can ask for 3-day weeks or 4-day week, that women have now sort of seemed to think that that's what expected of them as new mothers. Right. That it's expected that they will ask for a 3-day or a 4-day week rather than come back full time. And that, I think, is preventing them from playing as much of a part within the company as they could do. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, we have a very good return for maternity leave in BT, but 98% come back. And yes, some will choose to do reduced hours or compressed weeks. I think it comes back to the performance management, because you need to be managing people on their outcomes and deliverables, not just on what they do, but how they've done it. So what we do is we have 5 key behaviours that you have to be benchmarked against, and they include having a passion for your job, actually, is one of those behaviours we expect to see. So I think it comes down to having a measurement of performance for each individual and being quite zealous about maintaining that for that particular woman, so that it's seen as a temporary solution. I think there is a danger. Women cannot be seen as the people who do part-time work, because you know it is a bit of a blight, I think. So I would say it's to do with the performance management, and also, as I said earlier, getting men to do it as well. You know, and there are lots of men that need to reduce the working hours for periods of time, making it acceptable for them, and not having it as some kind of behaviour that only women exhibit. And maybe again having a senior manager saying, well, I'm working flexibly, or I'm not working on Fridays. We had our gender champion in BT until last year was a man, and he worked 4 days a week, and he was very open about saying that I don't work Fridays. I'm not having a meeting on Friday. I just don't do work on Friday. So you need that leadership of it as well.
So it's not just a woman thing, like making the cakes for the PTA stall. Yeah. Kate?
Thank you. There's so many questions here and so many directions we could diverge off. I think if we could have a whole day next year, Rosemary, that would be really helpful. The Equality and Human Rights Commission is extremely keen on facts and evidence in terms of the kind of decisions we make. So one of the things I want to pick up there is that question about maternity leave and breaks in careers. Even though we're so keen on facts and evidence, I must admit about a fortnight ago I had a bit of a light bulb moment when I discovered a new fact. Adele grinning at me, she knows my passion for facts and statistics. We've published, well actually quite sure who did publish, I think it's probably the British government published a very fact report like this called The Anatomy of Economic Inequality in Britain. We have published a Wales version of it. But in terms of looking at the British one for a moment, I was at an event at which the major author of this, John Hills, was speaking, and he put up this chart which tracked over time the employment experience of women along 6 lines, and this was according to whether women had low, medium or high levels of education, and according to whether they worked in the public or private sector. And what I hadn't really realised, despite all my years working in this field, is that at age 21, which is where the chart started, whether you were high, medium or low educated, and whichever sector you worked in, your earnings basically started at the same point. And then it tracked over time on the graph up to when you were age 60. And if you were a low educated woman working in the private sector, over your whole lifetime, setting inflation aside, there was absolutely no change in your earnings off of the national minimum wage for 40 years. And that was very striking. Some of the other charts went up according to middle and high, and as you can imagine, those with higher education were at the top of the chart, and the public sector continued past the age of 30. Women's earnings in real terms continued to go up right until the age of 60. In the private sector, there was a significant dip in the mid-30s, and that went down again substantially. And I think what we can see from there is some of the significance around maternity leave and childcare. So the truth is that there can be a dent to your career around maternity leave and childbirth, even if you've got high levels of education, but particularly in the private sector. I think we're very fortunate, those of us that have spent some time in the public sector, according to this chart. But what is very, very striking indeed is if you're a low-paid woman in the private or indeed the public sector with low levels of education and practically no chance of promotion anyway, then actually having a real level of support around maternity leave and flexible leave, there is no damage to your career taking a whole year off and working part-time, because that career in reality isn't going anywhere very much. And it was a very sobering and kind of shocking thought for me to understand. To come back very quickly on the question around public services and whether public services meet people's needs, women's needs, they probably don't, and well, we know they don't. And there are some opportunities now around the equality impact assessment I spoke about earlier. When public services are making cuts, they have an obligation to think who's going to be damaged. And I'm currently doing a tour around local government leaders, talking to them individually. And one of the things that was said to me around this topic in the Vale of Glamorgan last week is that actually public service and councils are going to engage more with this topic, because decision makers don't really want to be making decisions when they don't know the effect of what they're deciding. So that wasn't necessarily particularly well motivated in relation to disabled people or women or anybody else, but they don't want to take those kind of decisions. And as well as consulting and finding facts, I was in Bridgend yesterday having the same kind of discussion, and one thing which is very interesting that emerged there is that every quarter at the council cabinet meeting, they have a different person in just to talk for a few minutes about their real life, and they were talking about how they'd had a deaf woman in, talking about how her education, nobody bothered to educate her as a young person, she just was discounted in the education system. But then she discovered British Sign Language, and then she had some education, and then she got a degree, and then she became a lawyer, and now she's fighting those things. And the way that the very senior people in the council were talking to me, actually having that very short encounter at a cabinet meeting with some of the most important decision makers really is helping people, because I think a lot of the bad decisions that are taken are not taken because people want to take bad decisions, but because they just don't realise, and actually making that realisation is very, very important.
Thank you. Claire, would you like to comment?
To pick up the point you made about, is it just leaders at the top of organisation, or it's not just leaders at the top of an organisation who should be able to give leadership? I agree absolutely. I think that the strongest organisations are the ones where everybody is able to contribute and show leadership. And within the assembly, I think we've got people with real passion and commitment and determination, which for me are kind of true ingredients of leadership throughout the organisation, showing us the way, particularly on equality issues actually, but on different particular topics. They're showing us the way and helping us to be better. So they are our leaders within the organisation. Any organisation where the leaders at the top try to keep leadership to themselves is destined for failure, I would say.
Laura.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that, really, and I think it is about the culture of an organisation, really, and what the spirit of the organisation is, really, and Claire's absolutely right. I think leadership, particularly on equality, although on other things as well, can come from people who are at a relatively low, in inverted commas, level of the hierarchy of an organisation. I was thinking about our organisation, Adele, in Sport Wales, and interesting little anecdote about the customer services staff who identified a problem we were having with one of our disabled table tennis players, who, because we'd processed an issue around access to the training facility, but there was an issue about storage of equipment that was delaying her training program by about an hour a day. And for an elite athlete, in terms of time management, that is a lot. And that came to my attention purely because one of the customer services receptionists said to me, have you thought that we might want to develop storage equipment alongside the training? So it's about encouraging people to think for themselves, and not just about equality, about everything really within an organisation. And equally, I think, for us as leaders to be receptive to that, which does mean adopting behaviours that are often not the classic ones for leaders, which is to stroll down with your cup of tea and sit with them for a while and chat to people who are doing different jobs within the organisation. Or in my case, if I go into the gym and train, I speak to the centre attendants and the guys who fix the equipment and chat to them about issues they've noticed with some of our elite athletes or ordinary athletes coming in and out more generally. So I think it is about sort of setting the right culture, and that can come from the top, but equally the good ideas and innovation often come from different bits of the organisation as well.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much to all our panellists. I think, I'm sure you'll all agree, it's been fantastic listening to the four of them this morning. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Yn sicr mae wedi bod yn ddiddorol. Dwi ddim yn gwybod faint o atebion i ni wedi cael heddi, ond dwi'n meddwl bod y ffaith bod ni gyd wedi gallu dod at yn gilydd fan hyn i drafod rhai o'r materion yma sy'n ymwneud â menywod yn y gweithle yn arbennig wedi bod yn werthfawr tu hwnt. A dwi'n meddwl falle mae un o'r atebion yw bod y math yma beth falle'n cael i gynnal yn amlach, fel bod mwy o le gyda ni a mwy o gyfleoedd gyda ni fenwod i ddod yn gilydd fel hyn. A falle mae amser brecwast yw'r amser iawn yn hytrach na disgwyl bod ni'n gallu mynd mas yn y nos achos mae'n mor anodd, falle bod ni'n trio creu y math yma beth yn amlach. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Thank you very much.
Well, diolch yn fawr, and I'm sure you'll agree that was an absolutely inspirational session. It's a real... The rest of the day is going to be downhill from here, I think. I would like to, first of all, thank Angharad Meyer for a fantastic job of chairing. It's very difficult to chair anything, but when you've got a group of such talented women to try and control, it's really very difficult. But thank you so much. You've done a fantastic job. The panel have been, I think, incredible. Lots of stuff has come from this morning. You can have all the plans that you want and all the policies, unless somebody's implementing them, they're not worth, they're not worth the thing they look at. So I had wonderful plans, brilliant idea for this morning, but of course I haven't had to organise it. So I would like to thank Nong Gwilym and her team, because I think they've done a fantastic job. I don't think we could have coped with a whole day of new ideas. So, but the things I picked up from this morning is that every level of woman here today has actually had something for her. a whole range of things from, you've got to have your plans, get them implemented. Laura talked about missionary work. Absolutely right. We do need to have missionaries. But for those who are starting off in your career, I think it's very important that you understand that you're not too small to make a difference. And I do quote the Dalai Lama. I don't know him personally, but I do quote him, because he said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, you try sharing a bed with a mosquito. And I think, we've got the mosquitoes here this morning. And I think for those of you who already made it, or you're way up in your career, please remember not to pull the ladder up behind you. I think that's the important bit. You've got to hold your hand out to a sister who might need just one word of encouragement, and we'll move on. But the issue about confidence and skills, I try to encourage women to go into local authorities. It's a very good part-time job. You get paid, you can do it around your childcare, but people don't want to do it. They think they haven't got the confidence, they haven't got the skills. And I say, if you can get the children out of bed in the morning, get them off to school, get the old man out of bed, give him breakfast, get him to school, get yourself to work, pick the children up in the afternoon, get the shopping done, go and visit your mother, and you've got a bit of money of your budget left at the end of the week, then you can do anything. You can certainly run a council, you can run the assembly, and you could even run the world. So, little skills, just at a different level. And looking around here at the talent we got this morning, I think we could not only run Wales, we could definitely run the world. So I think it's been bendigedig this morning for my Welsh teacher, Sian. I do pick up the occasional Welsh word. It's been fantastic. We have another wonderful session later on today where we have Tori James speaking. If you haven't heard Tori and you don't have the opportunity today, you should try to listen to it at some point. She's about this big. She climbed Everest. And to hear how she actually, little woman achieved huge things. So thank you very much indeed. It's been quite inspirational. I hope that, I know that this will now move on, that we'll have these conferences around Wales, and then we'll have a conference later in the year where we, the women of Wales, will decide enough's enough, we've got to do something. Diolch yn fawr. I think that's a form bit, but you can actually network and talk to each other now.
Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru yw'r corff sy'n cael ei ethol yn ddemocrataidd i gynrychioli buddiannau Cymru a'i phobl, i ddeddfu ar gyfer Cymru ac i ddwyn Llywodraeth Cymru i gyfrif. I gael rhagor o wybodaeth ac i ganfod pwy sydd yn eich cynrychioli, ewch i cynulliadcymru.org neu gallwch chi'n dilyn ar Facebook a Twitter. The National Assembly for Wales is the democratically elected body that represents the interests of Wales and its people, makes laws for Wales, and holds the Welsh Government to account. For more information and to find out who represents you, go to assemblywales.org or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.